So today's lesson is from the book of Ruth. And if you've ever taken the time to read it, you might be, as I was, a little disillusioned with its seeming negativity. And so I give you a pause that maybe today before you rest your head, that you read it with a different emphasis than what the words themselves say. Because in the time that Ruth was written, women were not a source of income. Therefore, if they lost their husbands or those that took care of them, they were left to fend for themselves. Families were very tight, and it was very common for men to die of a young age as well, disease and a whole bunch of manner of things. So when you initially read Ruth, it becomes this story of, you gotta be freaking kidding me. Because it brings back, for me, my sense that Paul, who is years and years later, was still living in the time that women didn't have a say. This is not a talk about women. This is a talk about a love story that happened between two women, a mother-in-law and a daughter-in-law. So the story goes, the book of Ruth could have been the book of Naomi. Now, they didn't do that because it was important to show the lineage of Jesus, because that was an important thing. But at the time that Ruth was written, it was important to show the lineage of David. Now, as it turns out, Naomi is the mother of two sons, and those two sons married two women, Ruth and Obed, and during the time of a famine, these folks decided to move back to their hometown, Bethlehem, which is where they started. So, because family is so tight, Naomi said, I need to move back to Bethlehem because I have family there, and they'll take care of me. And she's very emphatic to her daughter-in-laws, don't come with me, because in truth, they're not kingsmen. They're not part of her family, because her sons passed on as well. So poor Naomi has lost her husband and her two sons. And when those kinds of tragedies happen to us on a human level, we want to seek out blame. And who better to blame than God? So Naomi is bitter. She's kind of like had enough of the God stuff. It's not working for her. So she becomes really enamored with, God is not my friend. So much, in fact, that when she moves back to Bethlehem, she wants to change her name to Mara, which metaphysically means bitter, because she was bitter, angry and bitter. Now, I know that none of us have ever been angry or bitter, but Naomi had it. She lived her life as bitter, and she didn't want to bring her daughter-in-laws to this land that they may not be tended to. She wanted them to stay where they were so that they could be continued to have a family connection. But Ruth says, wherever you go, I'm going. Whatever happens to you happens to me. Whatever God you have is my God. She is willing completely to follow Naomi into a strange land. Her trust and her love for Naomi is very, very strong. So fast forward, they move back to Bethlehem. And Boaz, who is a main character, is related to Naomi and lives in Bethlehem. So Naomi finds a kinsman and is tended to. She has a place to live, but she still has to support the family in some way. So the women go out into the wheat fields and they do what's called gleaning, which is when the trucks or the wagons, shall we say, come by with the harvest, things are dropped on the ground and the women are free to pick it up, and that's gleaning. And that gives them substance. So Ruth had a job. She had to come back every day with substance for the family that was taking care of her. This was not a free ride for anybody. Everybody had to work. And Naomi, being a smart cookie, says to Ruth, hey, listen, go into this particular field. He's a kinsman of mine. And you need to get his eye. So, as I would imagine, Ruth is a vivacious young woman. While the other women in the fields have probably been there a while, skin dragging from the heat and the sun and the not having enough substance. So there's this vibrant woman, and Boaz sees her. Boaz sees her in the field and says, excuse me, who are you? And his workers tell her, well, that's Ruth, the woman who Naomi took care of. Boaz knows that Naomi's part of her family, so he takes a pride in her. And he tells his workmen to keep their hands off of her, otherwise known for do not molest her. Okay, thank you. So she is given the freedom, and he also says, drop a little bit more off the wagon so she even has more substance. So Ruth goes back to Naomi and says, you won't believe what happened today. I met the Boaz guy. He is very rich, and I met him, and he seems to have a liking to me. And Naomi, smart cookie, says, this is what you got to do. After the harvest, because everybody gets drunk and they eat a lot, especially the men. So Boaz is in his tent, drunk as a stupor, full of belly, and she is told to lay at his feet with her best dress on and a little bit of perfume. Now imagine that perfume's probably kind of necessary, because they've been in the gleaming field for a long time, right? So she sleeps at his feet. He wakes up and sees this beautiful woman at his feet, and he says, I kind of like you. So they go have lunch. They go up to the Starbucks and have lunch. And he takes a liking to her, but there's something else that's going on underneath it, which is a protocol. Boaz is not at liberty to take Ruth on as his wife, because protocol says it must go to the next of kin. So, smart man that he is, he approaches the next of kin and says, have I got a deal for you? The land in Moab, which is where they came from, is up for grabs because it goes to the next of kin. And since Naomi's husband has died, and so has her sons, that land is available. It's part of the inheritance. So he offers it to him. The guy says, yeah, I think I'll take that land. He says, but you got to take Naomi with you. And you got to take Ruth with you. He says, no, I think I'll pass. He says, yep, I get to marry Ruth. Sense the lineage. Now, so Ruth has a child, and his name is Odad. Odad is the father of Jesse, and Jesse is the father of David. Hence the lineage. Okay? So that's the story part. Now let's get to the political part of this whole thing, because there's always the politics behind every story. And the politics is Nehemiah and Ezra. What? Yeah, Nehemiah and Ezra, right during that time, felt it was necessary to call out those men who married non-Jewish women. Ruth was a Moab. She was not Jewish. And part of Nehemiah's quest was to strengthen the Jewish community, because there'd been a dispersion, and so the Jews are constantly being kicked out of their land. Now, why is that? The Jews believe, and still do, that they are the chosen ones, right? Yeah. Somebody's got to do it. Might as well be the Jews. Well, the other part of the Jews is that because they're so family knitted, that whatever they picked up turned to gold. They had the best of everything. Every business was, because they were taught that when a business opened up, and you, part of the Jewish community, would only shop there. So all the money kept filtering back to the Jews. And when there's politics and there's money, there's going to be wars. So constantly tribes would disperse the Jews and then take over their businesses. It was just the natural order of things. And so the Jews were spread all over again. And in that process, they lost some of their language. They lost the connectedness, and they watered down their heritage of only being married to Jews. Make sense? So the book of Ruth was written as a part of rejection of Nehemiah and Ezra's rule of land. See, I'm going to marry a Moab woman, and not only is she not Jewish, but she becomes the grandmother of David. You see, so kind of like it disperses, and it says to Nehemiah and Ezra, in, and I'm going to do whatever I want. And that's part of the reason that the book of Ruth was put in there. You had to show the lineage of David. That was a necessary thing. But it was also a political statement at the time, and so it had to be included. So, all of that. What does this all mean metaphysically? Okay, that's the story, that's the political aspect of it. And we're told that this is a love story. Ruth's love for for Naomi was so strong that I'll go wherever you go. I will become whoever you become. I will be that person. So Ruth becomes a strong advocate of the Jewish religion, even though she wasn't Jewish. She fosters that stronghold of her belief system. Now, in the meantime, Naomi is still bitter with God until all this unveils. And then she lets go of her bitterness, and the story ends, and they lived happily ever after. But Naomi raises Ruth's children. And that's her way of giving back to God. And it's her turnaround in her sense of next slide please, I am beyond my bitterness, and I am back to loving a loving God, a Jewish God. So we have a famine, which metaphysically means a sense of not enough. That's what causes Naomi's family to move out of Bethlehem into Moab. While she's there, she brings two of her sons, and they all die, and she becomes angry and blames God. Am I the only one that's ever blamed God for things that happen in my life? I blame God all the time that I can't reach something on a higher shelf. Yo, God, I'm only 5 foot, what the heck? I have this relationship with God, and most of it's blame. When I don't get what I want, or I think that there's a struggle of some sort, it's God's fault. It's a thing that I have to catch myself doing and pause back and go, God doesn't do anything to me. It is my consciousness that creates that. So she loses a loss of faith, because God must be against her. Because when she left Bethlehem, she had a womb that could bear children. When she left Moab, she was empty. She was no longer of age to be able to create any children, which made her ineligible to find a man, which made her ineligible to find food, shelter, and all the necessities. So she moves. And moving, does that change the way we think and feel? How many of us have moved from job to job only to find out we're at both places? That even though we've left, we come right back to our consciousness, and the same scenarios happen in that environment as it did when we left, and why we left. Because we can't change our outer stuff without changing the inner first. So Naomi was all about changing the outer circumstances. Not about changing with God, but changing without God because of her anger and bitterness. And she has a name change which separates her even further from God. And then there's guidance within. And Naomi starts to open up, and she is the one that gives Ruth all this guidance that creates that environment for her. She is a catalyst of it, almost as if Ruth's God was Naomi. And in a lot of ways, that's who Ruth depended on. She trusted Naomi so much that she turned over her personal power to her and did what she needed to do to sustain herself. And the return of faith, the relationship with God returns. And Naomi shifts gears and makes a decision to become a viable part of the Ruth family. So the roles have changed, you see, because Ruth was the daughter-in-law of Naomi, and now it's almost as if Ruth Naomi is the daughter-in-law of Ruth. They've shifted gears. They've shifted it. And trust and taking action. Go where you go. Because where you go is where you're going to be. So you might as well surrender to who am I? Who am I and what do I want to do about who I am? Next slide. And part of this is we have this drama triangle. How many of us have ever been in a drama triangle? Oh, no, really? Raise your hand. You know, if we have a mother, we're in a triangle. You know, if we have a child, we're in a triangle. It's for goodness sakes, because there's always one of these three things going on all the time. And Ruth did all three of them. And so did Naomi. She was the hero by suggesting, Ruth, go to Boaz. She's the villain because she's the one that says, I don't want to be here anymore. Blame God, the whole nine, and then, of course, the victim. No one's wrong, but everybody's wrong. You know, there's that sense there. So which character played each role? You see, because Ruth is in here. Even her husband is in this. God is in this. Because we have a triangle going on all the time in our lives. And when we are in that sense of not enough, the sense of guilt, the sense of wrongness, the sense of God doesn't love me as much as somebody else, he has, she has, and I want, there's a triangle going on here. And the more we become aware of where we are in the drama triangle, the easier it is for us to walk away from it, to shift. You see, because the saying goes, it takes two to tango. So when we're up against something that is struggling us or causing us to doubt our connection with God, we are one of these three issues. And we can step away from it and say, I choose something different. You know, it's kind of like, I grew up with a very loud, vocal mother. She screamed a lot. That was her way of communicating. So much, in fact, that on our quarter acre of land, the neighbors would come and visit us whenever she had one of those screaming matches at us. It was amazing, that the gift that they gave us. They would knock on the door and go, Betty, how would you like a cup of coffee? And my mother would shift to, oh, yes, of course, come on in. You know, without a care in the world, and the rest of us are going, okay, we got 5 minutes to fix this, whatever it was that needed fixing, you know. So the neighbors were the hero, we were the victims, and my mom was the villain. And it wasn't until we said to my mom in a unified voice, we're not going to play this anymore. If we muck up as kids, you need to just talk to us in a normal tone. Well, that went in one ear and out the other. But we made an effort. You know, we wanted to step out of it, even unbeknownst of what it was called. And we as adults get to do that today, too. You know, we get to move off of it and say, I'm not going to play. Today's not a good day. I'm not going to take on any one of these roles. I'm not going to save you. I'm also not going to victimize you. And I'm not going to be, woe is me, the villain. I'm not going to cause you pain. If I cause you pain, whose fault is it? Yours. Because you let that in. And that's that consciousness we talked about. You know, the conscious, the subconscious, and the superconscious. Which one are you operating on? The automatic pilot? I'm going to defend and fight to the end? Or are you going to say, wait a second. God is with me. I know it. I know it to be true. And I'm going to allow that to happen. I'm going to allow God to guide me. And sometimes God's guidance comes from other people, doesn't it? It's amazing when we're paying attention how something so easy and something so simple somebody says, it then lands. And you're like, wow, why didn't I think of that? You know, that kind of thing. Next slide, please. So our homework, you know, is when things do not go well and we become angry, what do? What's your go-to? What's that subconsciousness? Goes right there. And unless we pause and say, do I want that? We have to take a different role. We have to go to the superconscious and pull from it, the goodness. Are we trying to change things on the outside, hoping things will be different? Or are we going within through our prayer and meditation time to say, what is this about me that needs to shift. And then follow that guidance. And is a change needed? Probably. Even if it's just a change of going to bed at 9 instead of 10 so we get proper rest so we're not cranky-faced the next day. Right? It could be simple things like that. Or it could be the major changes. I need to resolve this relationship so that I'm no longer in the triangle. And one of the ways we do that is we walk away from that triangle. The hardest thing you do and the best gift you can give yourself. To walk away from the discord. Especially if the discord is outside of ourselves, which most of it comes from. You know, if the newspaper gives you angst, stop reading the newspaper. This is not rocket science, is it? So when you feel yourself getting angry or upset or bitter, what's causing it? Go within and determine what that is and how I want to change that. Because the less bitter, the less angry, and the less disappointment we are with God, the more that the good God message comes through. Because God didn't cause anything to happen to us. We caused it. You know, whether it doesn't matter whether you believe it or not, in our subconscious mind, we create what we have. Our bodies are because of our thinking. That's a good thing. And our bodies are also not what they are because of our thinking. You see? So are you telling your body that it's a beautiful thing? Or are you saying, gee, I wish I was taller? You know? Do we discount what we have, what we've created? Because when we start talking to our body in a non-triangular way, beautiful things happen to it. It starts to respond. Myrtle Fillmore was a perfect example of that. She spoke to her body in a positive, loving, God-centered way. And we can do that too. And first we stop by not talking negatively about our bodies or other people or other circumstances. It changes who we get attracted to, doesn't it? If we start thinking about what's good out there. And that's what Ruth did. She saw the good in everything that happened to her life, including the death of her husband, including the life that she chose to be with Naomi. It's a beautiful love story, but it's also a story about turning to God for all that happens in our lives. And to not blame God for our circumstances. We have the circumstances so that we can change our perception of God, to be a different catalyst for that change. We can change the world by changing ourselves into something good, as we're hearing the music. There is good in everything. We just have to open our eyes to see it. And in that divine presence, I am guided. In that divine presence, I am guided. So stay out of the triangle, become aware of it, and walk away from it. Make the change inner and outer, and things will rapidly change within you. I know it, I see it, and I believe it. And so it must be true. So there you go. Thank you. Appreciate you.